Have you ever sat down at a Mexican restaurant, ordered a plate of tacos or enchiladas, and noticed that reddish, flavorful side dish called Spanish rice? It's a staple on countless menus, known for its vibrant color and savory aroma. But have you ever stopped to wonder, why is it called Spanish rice? Is it really from Spain? Or is it one of those culinary names that got a little mixed up in translation? Today, we're diving into the fascinating story of how this beloved dish got its name and why it's actually more Mexican than Spanish. Let's explore, right here, on History of Simple Things. To start, let's clear up one big misconception right away. Spanish rice is not actually from Spain. In fact, if you went to Spain and asked for Arroz Español, you'd likely get some puzzled looks. The dish most people in the United States know as Spanish rice, made with rice, tomatoes, onions, garlic, and spices, is actually a Mexican creation. So how did a Mexican dish end up being labeled Spanish? The answer lies in history, language, and a little bit of culinary evolution. The roots of Spanish rice go all the way back to the early 1500s, when Spanish explorers arrived in the Americas. Among the many ingredients and animals they brought with them, like wheat, pigs, and cattle, was rice. Rice was not native to the Americas. It originated in Asia, and the Spanish had been growing it for centuries, particularly in the region of Valencia, where the famous paella comes from. When Spanish colonizers brought rice to Mexico, it quickly became part of local agriculture and cuisine. Mexican cooks, being creative and resourceful, took this new grain and adapted it to their own ingredients and flavors. They combined rice with native foods like tomatoes, chili peppers, and local herbs. Over time, this fusion gave birth to what we now know as Mexican rice, though the Spanish influence in introducing rice to Mexico was undeniable. So, when English speakers later encountered this dish, they called it Spanish rice, simply because rice itself had been introduced by the Spanish. In other words, the name doesn't describe where the dish came from, but rather who brought the rice to Mexico in the first place. It's also important to understand the cultural mixing that was happening during colonial times. The blending of Spanish and indigenous traditions created what historians often call mestizo culture, a combination of European and native influences in food, language, and customs. Spanish rice, or Arroz Rojo, as it's called in Mexico, is a perfect example of that blend. The Spanish brought the rice and cooking methods, while indigenous Mexicans provided the tomatoes, spices, and creativity that gave the dish its iconic color and flavor. Interestingly, the name Spanish rice seems to have originated in the United States. When Mexican cuisine began spreading northward, particularly into Texas and the southwestern U.S., many Americans associated anything involving rice and tomatoes with Spain, not Mexico. At that time, Spanish culture had a kind of exotic, romantic image in the American imagination. So labeling a dish Spanish rice made it sound elegant and foreign, even though it was really Mexican at heart. It's a bit like how French fries aren't from France, or how English muffins didn't actually come from England. Sometimes names stick for reasons that have more to do with perception than accuracy. In Mexico, the dish is rarely, if ever, called Spanish rice. Instead, it's usually known as Arroz Rojo, meaning red rice, or simply Arroz a la Mexicana, Mexican-style rice. The name comes from the use of tomatoes or tomato sauce, which give it that beautiful reddish tint. The basic recipe involves browning the rice in oil until it turns golden, then simmering it with a tomato mixture, onions, garlic, and chicken broth. The result is a fluffy, flavorful side dish that pairs perfectly with nearly any Mexican meal. Another key to understanding the confusion lies in how cuisines influence each other. Spanish cuisine has many rice dishes of its own, most famously paella. Paella is a saffron-infused rice dish cooked with seafood, chicken, and vegetables, and it served as a kind of inspiration for rice-based dishes in the colonies. When Spaniards introduced rice to Mexico, it's possible that local cooks tried to replicate or reinterpret something similar to paella using local ingredients. Over time, the Mexican version evolved into something entirely different, simpler, tomato-based, and uniquely seasoned. But the Spanish connection remained in the name. If you look at recipes across Latin America, you'll find countless variations of rice dishes that trace their roots to this same blend of Spanish influence and local flavor. In Puerto Rico, there's arroz con gandules. In Cuba, arroz con pollo, and in Mexico, arroz rojo. All these dishes share a similar heritage, rice brought by the Spanish, transformed by local cultures. So while Spanish rice may be a misnomer, it's still part of a broader family of Latin-inspired rice dishes that celebrate the meeting of old and new worlds. Over time, the name Spanish rice became so popular in the United States that it stuck. Cookbooks, restaurants, and even packaged rice mixes began labeling it that way, and the term eventually became the standard name in American English. Meanwhile, Mexicans continued to cook and serve the same dish under its traditional name, Arroz Rojo. Today, if you see Spanish rice on a menu, it's almost always a Mexican-style rice dish, not something you'd find in Madrid or Barcelona. So the next time you take a bite of Spanish rice, remember, you're tasting a dish that carries centuries of history in every grain. It's not really Spanish, but that's what makes it fascinating. It's a dish born from two worlds coming together, a fusion of tradition, adaptation, and flavor. And that, more than anything, is what makes Spanish rice so special. Thank you for watching. If you have suggestions for our next video, feel free to share them in the comments below. We'll be sure to give you an acknowledgement for your contribution. If you enjoyed this video, please check out our other bingeable channels. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the history of simple things. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories woven through the smallest details.